Hello, book lovers, and welcome to the 116th episode of Authors Bookstores, presented by A Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Kimberly Hensle Lowrance. For the past 2.5 years, I have virtually traveled across the US, Canada, and Great Britain with my partner, Joe Moldover, to support authors and independent bookstores. We do this by bringing to you conversations that shine a light on storytelling, creativity, must-read books, and small businesses that enrich and brighten our communities. Today is a first for us. Our guests are 3 best-selling authors who have jointly, collaboratively written a wonderful novel together. The novel, When We Had Wings, is terrific. I couldn't put it down. A page turner, kind of like the best thing you want in a book, where you forget your children, forget to sleep, forget to eat. And I really enjoyed it. And I can't wait to talk about this book and how it came to be. So let me introduce you to our wonderful group of authors. We are joined today by ARIEL LAWHON, who is a critically acclaimed New York Times bestselling author of historical fiction. She's the author of 5 novels, and her books have been translated into numerous languages. And her books have been Costco Best Picks, Amazon Spotlight Books, Indie Next Picks, Book of the Month Club selections, all of the things you want your books to happen to. And she's coming to us from Nashville, Tennessee. KRISTINA McMORRIS is a New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and USA best-selling author of 2 novellas and 7 historical novels, including Sold on a Monday, which sold more than 1 million copies. KRISTINA is a recipient of more than 20 National Literary Awards, and her background includes stints as a television host and a wedding and events planner. She comes to us from the Portland, Oregon area. SUSAN MEISSNER is a USA Today bestselling author of historical fiction with more than 750,000 books in readers' hands. She has 15 books. They've been translated into 18 languages. She's an award-winning author, speaker, and writing workshop leader with a background in community journalism, and she's coming to us from the Pacific Northwest. Welcome.
Yay! Hi. Thanks for having us.
You 3 are I'm so happy to. You 3 are historical fiction rock stars. And so we're so grateful that you're here on our show, that we get to talk about this terrific book. Thank you. And I see Susie's writing to us in the comments and saying 3 awesome authors. Yes, Susie, we totally agree. And if you have comments, our audience, please post them below and we'll get to as many as we can later on. So congratulations on When We Had Wings.
Thank you.
I was pulling all these reviews in advance, and I loved the descriptions that people use to describe this book. Illuminating, gripping, sweeping, emotional, moving, breathtaking, thrilling, riveting, deeply felt. I mean, all the things you want to see when people have read your books. It was also an Amazon editor's pick, and I'm sure I'm missing so many other accolades that you've gotten for this book. Tell us, ARIEL, why don't you kick us off? Tell us what this book is about and why it's getting so much wonderful buzz.
I would love to. When We Had Wings is the story of 3 nurses in the Philippines during World War II. All 3 of these nurses came there for different reasons. One of them is a Filipino native. One of them is a U.S. Navy nurse, and one of them is a U.S. Army nurse. And they all meet in the days leading up to World War II. They become fast friends. And then, of course, overnight on December 8th, their world changes. That is when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and then several hours later bombed the Philippines. So overnight, these women go from this paradise assignment where they are treating splinters and sunburns to suddenly serving in a war zone. And this novel covers their time in the Philippines during World War II.
Wonderful. And I know I read a little bit about how this book came to be. And am I right that you were approached by your publisher and you were asked to jointly write this book? Because that sounds like a dream, actually, right? That your publisher's like, hey, we love you so much. We want to have you write a book together. Is that, KRISTINA, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't even my publisher. So it was exciting. Like, you know who we are. So, which is always nice. I like to liken it to Ocean's 11, and that you get all these actors who are friends, and so the three of us were already friends, and Ariel and I more online for years than anything. Both of us friends with Susan in person. And so she was kind of our bridge, even though, as Ariel explained, Ariel's character becomes the bridge in our story instead. But yes, we, as the literary Ocean's 11 group, when they come to you and say, hey, would you three friends like to write a book together? And you absolutely don't say no to that. So it sounds fun. And of course, about a topic that we're really passionate about. So they did give us the parameters of World War II, but basically said, pick a story that you want. And thankfully, Susan is the one who came across a documentary then when she did a deep dive on research and trying to find a topic from World War II that we didn't feel had been done over and over again, and trying to find some unique aspect, some lesser known fact that we wanted to help shine a light on. And when we came across then the Angels of Baton, which of course the servicemen dubbed them because these nurses were so amazing, we knew that we had our story. And the fact there were 3 types of nurses, I mean, you couldn't even pick this up. I mean, I like to say if there was a 4th nurse, we'd have to go find somebody, or 2 would be worse because we'd have to cut someone, When
I was reading the book and I saw 3 authors, 3 main characters, I thought, well, that's perfect. And then I spent most of the book trying to figure out, I guess that you each took a character.
Yes.
Okay. And so I spent the whole book trying to figure out who wrote which one. And I guess, Kristina, that you probably wrote Lita.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
I think the half Asian one. Can you imagine?
Well, I thought that seems like that you would be able to bring an awareness to that character that would be very critical to developing her.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was thrilled. I was worried that one of the other 2 would want to take her, and it was so great that Ariel's like, "Would you want?" I was like, "Yes, I want her. Of course I do," because as you know, she's a mestiza, is what they call her in Tagalog. So the Philippines, she would be considered back then. I hate the term now, but a half breed. And so, given that she had a Caucasian American missionary father and a Filipina mother, and not knowing exactly what world she belonged in, having a foot sort of in both cultures. And that was something that I could absolutely relate to, since my father is from Kyoto and my mother has the Irish side. So yes, I could relate a bit. And even though she's equally confused as I was.
And then Susan, which character did you write?
So I wrote the Navy nurse, and her name is Eleanor. And and it was really wonderful how we all landed our characters, because we got the ones we wanted and really the ones that we are best suited to write. My character is the Navy nurse, and I love that because my father was a career naval officer, fought in Korea. My son was in the Navy. I'm from San Diego, which is a Navy town.
Yep.
Yeah. And I lived in Minnesota for about 13 years. And so I kind of, I know that culture. I know what it's like to live in a place that's really in the middle of the United States. And there are a great many people that I met, including my father-in-law, who's from Minnesota, who have never seen the ocean. And so my character leaves it all. She's a nurse in Minneapolis, but she leaves it all brokenhearted after a failed romance, and goes about as far away as anybody can go from the broken pieces of her life. And she gets stationed in Manila in just a few months before World War II starts.
And then Ariel, that means you had Penny.
Yes, I got Penny, and I'm so glad I did. I really, really wanted the Army nurse for several specific reasons. Like Susan, I have a very personal connection to the U.S. Army. My grandfather was a lieutenant colonel during World War II. He was in the European theater, not the Pacific theater. But he was there. He was fighting during this time. And then, of course, my father, many years later, was military police during Vietnam. So I understand the U.S. Army. I have a great deal of respect for what those men and women did to sacrifice. And of course, I made Penny a Texan. I married a Texan. My parents are Texans. All of my grandparents were Texans. And 2 of our 4 boys are Texans. So I'm very fluent in the language. I know the dialect well. And I felt it would be really, really fun to bring her to life that way.
I really love how all of you were able to bring personal elements into the story. I mean, I find that's, I mean, that's, as a reader, that's what we love to hear, right? We love to know a little bit, get to know the author a little bit by the characters they create. And it really adds a great depth to the story. I love hearing that. Thank you for sharing that with us. Susan, so you found the documentary that that became the spark to the story. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was about this story, that documentary that pulled the group in that direction?
Sure. Well, the documentary is actually available on Amazon Prime, if I'm not mistaken. And I did happen upon the link to it just during a Google dive. And I think what I was looking for was my search engine words were unsung female heroes of World War II. And the title Angels of Bataan popped up. And I had never heard of the Angels of Bataan. All I knew about was the Bataan Death March, which I knew, a lot about. But this other term was unfamiliar to me. And so when I looked further, saw the documentary and realized there were uniformed female nurses stationed in the Philippines when the Japanese attacked, were there for the duration of the invasion, were there for the duration of the occupation, were incarcerated just like all the men were. And yet they continued to nurse, unlike some of the prisoners who could do nothing except wait for a rescue. These women kept nursing in the most austere of circumstances. And so I sent the link to the documentary to Ariel and KRISTINA. We knew right away we had found our topic. And really, the next thing we did was read a book by Elizabeth Norman called We Band of Angels. And that was really the book that introduced us to these women. The documentary was just like opening the door and finding out what they really were like as nurses and compassionate human beings and the bravest people you're likely to ever encounter was that book, We Band of Angels by Elizabeth Norman.
We're going to put the link to that book below for people
Please
who
do.
want
It's
to
a
read more.
wonderful book.
Oh, fabulous. I'm struck by your description of these nurses continuing to provide medical care during their captivity. I wonder if for some of them that was a source of strength. They had a purpose at a time when so many of them felt helpless, I would imagine. Here they could be more than just a prisoner. They could be of value to their fellow soldiers. Did you come across any conversation or writings about the nurses and their sort of general state that surprised you, that pulled the book in a different direction? Anything that you came across in your research that you thought, well, I would have imagined this?
Well, these nurses weren't able to speak about their experiences for many decades when they were rescued, brought back to the United States, and they received some minimal, I would say, recognition for their sacrifice, but not what they deserved. By no means what they deserved. And then they were asked, "Don't talk about it." It could be for a lot of reasons. It could be, a lot of wartime stuff is classified, but more than likely it was because they were left there. They were kind of abandoned there, and females in a war zone that's just not something. It was a very dangerous situation to place female military people in, and they were left. And so it could be that they just didn't want them talking about it because it was embarrassing. So we didn't hear from our nurses for a long, long time. It wasn't until Elizabeth Norman wrote that book in 1999, when only 20 of them were still living, that they finally spoke up about their experiences. And that's how we began to hear more about them. So there aren't enough memoirs. Only a few of them wrote any memoirs. I have one written by one of the Navy nurses, but we didn't hear much from them. We should have heard more, which is one of the reasons why we wrote this book. And I think you would find that they did not feel like they were rising to heroics. They were just doing what had to be done because they were nurses. That's what they did. They already had that gene inside of them that makes them want to help people who are in pain. It would be they would not be able to not do what they did, I think. And the fact that they did it with nothing is even more remarkable.
It is. KRISTINA, what is it about World War II and that era that is such a draw for readers and writers? I mean, there are so many books out there about that era that are so captivating, and we keep wanting more, right? I mean, obviously, if the publisher approached the three of you and said that's the era that they wanted you to focus on, there is a market for this. What is it about it that you think is such continues to be so important to us today.
Yeah. Well, I think just like Susan touched on, I think that there are a lot of stories that haven't been told yet. So for lots of reasons, either because people compartmentalized it when they came back because they were told not to talk about it. For the women, it was obviously much more acceptable to come back and put dinner on the table at 5 o'clock and kind of go about life the way it used to be and kind of mothball your uniforms and not speak about your experiences. And I know for a fact that when I wrote my debut novel, that Letters from Home, it included a woman who served with the Women's Army Corps with the WACs and read specifically in their memoirs and their diaries and their journals about how even their own mothers would tell them, I don't want to hear about your experiences. Let's just go on with life without it. And, there were a lot of rumors, I think, also that spread around about these women because people like to keep things the way they are. They don't like change in general society. And so telling these women just, or letting rumors spread during the war, then I'm sure happened with some of the nurses as well, that kind of keeping up morale in any way possible, that sort of terrible sort of rumor. And so some of these women did not talk about their experiences for that reason too. And I think that now, because times have changed, thankfully, in a good way, for these women, that some of these unsung heroes that Sue mentioned are now coming to the surface. I think that we didn't hear about a lot of the women's experiences from World War II. And when you look at books like Ariel has written a gorgeous book, Codename Helene. Is it Helene or Helene? Which one is it?
Helene, I think. I say Helene because I live in the South.
Right. So depending on where you are, in remarkable stories of these women who were just ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances that have the strength and courage that we can't really wrap our minds around today. And the reason that I specifically love reading and writing about eras like World War II is because there are so many parallels, I think, to any time period, and that we go through struggles and dark times. And I can't think of a darker time for the entire world that the stakes were never higher. And so when you go through those hard times and find hope and light on the other side, I believe that it helps give us hope that if they made that through, they have that strength to get through what they did, we can too.
That's so great. Thank you for saying that. And also you reminded me that we're putting below the broadcast links to buy all of the other books that you three have written. It's like a full library just here, just the three of you. And so that is the question that fascinated me as I was reading the book, the logistics of three best-selling authors who have established themselves, who have their own writing styles, and who are friends. It's kind of like buying a house together, right? Like buying a house with your friends. Like, what are the rules? Like, how did the three of you decide, how are we going to do this? Because you don't even sound like you live in the same town. So what are the logistics? How did you, Ariel, I'm going to kick this, have you kick us off. Was there an outline? How did the process begin? How did you logistically write the book together?
So that is actually a great question. And it's one that we get probably the most often because people are fascinated by it.
Because our heads explode.
I would have been fascinated. I guess I am fascinated anytime I see a collaboration. And I can only speak to ours. Ours came about sort of as we went. The issue that we were dealing with is that all three of us have our own careers. And when this opportunity was presented to us, we were all three on deadline for different books. And so we knew that there was going to have to be a lot of communication about, I can do this then, but not later. And we also knew that we were going to have to kind of toggle back and forth. So initially, once we had the idea settled, we did our basic research. We knew the time frame, the dates that we were working within, and we knew many of the important events that happened during that date and those dates. And as it would happen, Susan finished her novel first. So she had the first opening in the schedule. She really laid the tracks for this story. I think she and Kristina are tied for the hardest parts. But she got everything in place. She really set every signpost. She wrote all of Eleanor's chapters chronologically, leaving gaps for me and for Kristina. And it was really fun, to get the manuscript and it would be like, insert thrilling event for Penny here, or Lita must have cliffhanger. And we got this manuscript and it was a third of the way done. So I had the second opening, which I think I had the easiest job because I was the bridge. I was able to sit there and go, this is what's been set down. This has to come. I'll put all of my parts in between there. And it actually worked out really well that way because my character, Penny, just based on where she was geographically in real life, even though she's fictional, where the army nurses were, the other characters were constantly coming in and out of her location during the course of the war. And so she was able to be this bridge for the friendship, sort of a sense of continuity to establish how close these women were throughout the entirety of the war. And then poor Kristina had to land the plane, and boy, did the manuscript look different. By the time she got it, than anything we'd agreed to. We put some speed bumps in her way, and we're like, haha, here's a challenge for you. You get to fix it. And she was the one really to wrap everything up, and she'd go, well, here's a hole that needs to be filled, and here's a challenge that I have. And she really took our two stories and knit them together tightly.
Oh, that's fascinating. It feels a bit like a relay race.
Yes.
Yeah. And you were each carrying part of the story. That's really, really fascinating. I couldn't figure out how you did it. I really was like, what? The logistics of it. What happens if there was a disagreement? Or was there never a disagreement?
Minor things. There's always things, because when you write 1/3 of a story, you're focused on the thing that's happening to your character. So it's really easy to lose sight of the important things that need to happen with the other characters. And anytime something like that came up, we just sat down and we're like, okay, what does the story need? And all three of us were really good about putting the story first versus our character first. And so if things had to get cut, it got cut for the sake of the story. Or if new things had to be written, they were written for the sake of the story. And we just adapted and moved on.
Wonderful. Kristina, what was your favorite part of this collaboration?
Well, touring.
Right.
Like you said before, the book, and it was so, when we got to hold it in our hands and you go, wow, we really did this in the middle of a pandemic and in 3 separate parts of the country. But then you go on tour together and you realize that the book felt secondary almost. We just had so much fun together. And like you said, kind of like buying a house together. I would compare it to you can have such good friends until you travel with them. And then wow, I like them more before we shared a hotel room, because you can't travel with everyone and you can't write a book with everyone. We had never done this before in a novel form. Like Jenna Blum and I, of course, did, an anthology that we mentioned before together, and I'd done those with other authors, but we always had our own sort of lane we stayed in and do a few connecting threads, but not to make a whole cohesive novel. And so I think we're really proud of that. And it's nice to hear people saying that, that the narrative seems seamless, and which is kind of crazy to us because we really did write it so separately, and having our own narrative voice was important for each one of our characters. So I think that works really well, in that usually an author, when you're by yourself and you come up with 3 different points of view, you want each one to have a slightly different voice, of course. Right. You don't want them all to sound the same. And yet we somehow, our styles blended really well together too. And I think that it could pass as one author is what we've heard very often from people in the best of ways. So that's been really fun. So we had so much fun with 2 weeks kind of on and off of traveling around the country and doing events together and getting to present. Most important thing is present the stories what these real women did in real life, which a lot of people are surprised about.
Tell her about Betty. You got to tell her about Betty.
Tell me about Betty.
Oh, sweet Betty. So we were at Warwick's, which of course we absolutely love, down in San Diego in Indy Sport. And we did our whole dog and pony show. We call it. We did our slide presentations. That was fantastic. That Susan helped put together. And then at the end we had Q&A, and about halfway through the Q&A, a woman raised her hand and said, I don't have a question. I just wanted to introduce you to my mother. This is Betty. And sweet Betty stood up, who was how old? 103? 103 years old. But you would never know it. She had more energy than us, I think, and stood up and introduced herself as being one of the nurses that served during World War II in the Philippines. And she arrived there just at the end when they had been liberated and our Angels of Baton had come back to the U.S. Wow. So she said, everything that you all shared tonight lines up perfectly with what I was told about them when I arrived. And I still get chills.
Oh, wow.
Kristina and I were sobbing.
Yeah, it was so sweet.
Oh, wow.
And it was amazing, truly. So she was, I think, also in awe of these women who had been through such hardships when she wasn't there.
Of course. Oh, what a compliment, right? To have
it was, we didn't expect it. You couldn't predict it. They had to lob a box of tissue at us on stage.
Of course.
Tissues. And I will mention too that the last nurse that did serve as part of the Angels passed away in 2013. So she felt like this closest connection that we probably will ever have.
Right.
To them.
Yeah. Well, it really, I mean, I think the story of the nurses and the fact that so many of them didn't tell what happened to them, it adds a real urgency to books like yours, right? Because these stories will disappear and no one will ever know about them. So even though this is fiction, we still learn from fiction, right?
Absolutely.
We still can be moved and we can be
Absolutely.
changed, and there's a real urgency to this story. Oh wow! Thank you for sharing Betty with us. Susan, I wonder, now that you've done this collaboration, when you sit down to do your next book, I know you have a book coming out next year. We're going to talk about that. But when you sit down to write your next book, are you a different writer now? Have you changed from your approach to storytelling, having had such close collaboration? Does it make you think about your work differently?
It does in some ways. I'm surprised that I can still learn new things. Isn't that great that we can always still learn new things? Even though I've written a number of books on my own, I learned some new things about how to craft a novel. And one of them is from Ariel. And she's like, you need to get to the action quicker, which I knew that, but I don't know, maybe you just need to be reminded of it. And so we ended up cutting one of Eleanor's chapters because we needed to get to the action quicker. And it's just the right thing to do. If you're a writer and you're listening and someone says to you, it's slow, you need to get to the action quicker, they're probably giving you really good advice. So that's one thing I would say I was reminded of, is how important it is to draw the reader in with action they can see and feel. Because if you're just trying to draw them in with some language, we live in a culture right now where people are probably have less of an attention span. I guess I can say that without demeaning anybody, but we do. I think we are much more. We need to be entertained a little bit more in a quicker way. So I appreciate that from Ariel, and I think Kristina helped me with. I have my favorite words, and she's really good about helping me find out where I've been repeating myself or using the same phrase or the same turns of phrase, or just even putting too many words when one would do. So, and all of those are things I already knew, but it was like going back to writing 101, writing with these good friends, and helped me kind of just recalibrate my skills as a writer. Because when you write in isolation, sometimes you kind of forget the basics.
Yeah. Ariel, Kristina, are you different writers now? Have you?
Absolutely.
What would you take from this experience?
I know the big thing for me, and this is a problem I struggle with in my writing, and both Susan and Kristina taught me this sort of simultaneously as we were going through it. I tend to overthink everything, and I tend to overcomplicate everything. And with this book, given the time frame we were under and the just juggling of schedules and all the different things we were doing, there just was not a lot of time for that. And there would be times, I'm thinking of one scene specifically of Penny's that ended up being one of my favorite scenes of hers. Came toward the end of the writing process. We'd all been writing our own novels, and we'd finished this one, and you just feel written to death at some point. And I needed to add something toward the end of Penny. And I was like, you know what? Don't overthink it. You know what needs to happen. And I sat down and I pounded it out. I didn't overcomplicate it. And the result was a scene I really, really love. And I've told several people going forward, that is something I'm going to apply to all my work. I don't have to make everything complicated. And it's something I tend to do with my own work.
Excellent. Kristina, what about you?
Oh, I didn't learn anything from these two.
Nothing for you. You knew it all.
I taught them everything they know. Okay.
Yes.
All their bestsellers in the future. No, my gosh, yes, of course. And I will say specifically, because they already touched on the general, Susan in the beginning, we had a different structure. We were going to do one character for the first part of the war as another character for the second. And Lita, I was going to be the third. And so that was part of the runway completely changing by the time the plane, I was supposed to land the plane. But it was, and that really came, I believe, from Susan, because I think she came in, she laid the tracks, and she said, you know what, I really don't think this would be as strong as if we don't interweave them. And that was taking an entire outline structure, tossing it out the window when we are on a tight deadline. And it was brilliant. And it was absolutely the right thing to do. And I've never done that before. Never gone, okay, here's the structure. We're going to throw it all out.
Wow.
And to not be afraid of that. So that was amazing. And it was the right choice. Just because we were on a tight deadline didn't mean that we didn't need to do what was best for the story. So that was amazing. And I have to say, oh my goodness, Ariel, because I'm thinking specifics right now, that at the since I won't give a spoiler here, but since at the very end of the story, there is a character named Caesar. And how he is tied to the story specifically to other characters is because of Ariel. And it was it was right at the end, and I was finishing up the epilogue from my character, because Lita finishes, and Ariel had read mine, and we were all done. And she said, she said, the only thing I was disappointed, I thought this was going to happen. I went, oh my gosh. And I remember it gave me chills, and she goes, I had chills, and we had both chills. And it just felt like it was the perfect ending to what our characters had gone through. And so that was wonderful. And I will say, I've got to add, because I think all three of us have talked about this, that we realized how fast we can write.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
In the best of ways, and not come out with something that's sloppy. We weren't afraid because we didn't have a choice, because we were all on our own deadlines for novels. And then we had this on the side as well. And our deadlines were getting tight, and we had each one of us had very limited time to write our section. And you could either sit and stress about it and lose sleep over it, or you could just say, you know what, this is all I've got. So let's just dive in and not be afraid. And we all felt like we were running sort of, I think, without weights is the way that I felt.
Well, and to add on to that, I think one thing that really helps when you do a collaboration like this, that you have two other people helping hold the story up.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
That, if I miss a beat here or something saggy over there, that you're not doing it alone, and you have two other people to point it out to you as well. So any weaknesses get addressed quickly, and it allows you to write quickly.
Yep.
Excellent. We're getting some audience questions. Both Susie and Anissa have asked, are you going to write another book together? They didn't say it as directly as I am saying it. They were a little nicer. So I'm just going to paraphrase it. Would you do it again? Would you write another book together?
I think that we'd look for any excuse to tour together again.
Yeah.
And if a publisher wanted to pay us, then we'd be like, sounds pretty good. Yeah. So I think all three of us have talked about the fact that we're very open to something like that, and also understanding that the pandemic was sort of a unique time that we actually had some time to squeeze that in. That was unique, and now we're all back to the grind of our solo books and having back-to-back books and that kind of thing. So we'll be busy for a while, but of course we'll just look for an excuse to get together. Really.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, it's clear that the friendship that the three of you share is in this story, between the three characters. It's definitely, I can see parallels, and that's really lovely. So the focus of our show really is authors, books, but also independent bookstores. So that is an angle that we always like to weave in. And I know the three of you each have a bookstore that you want to mention. So if we can go around and just mention the local indie that we have connections to, or maybe not even local, just the indie we have connections to, and why this bookstore is special. So Susan, why don't you start us off? You are interested in talking to us about
Warwick's Books in San Diego. It's my hometown. It's the bookstore that I grew up going to, and it's where I love to go back anytime I have a new book out. Even though I live in the Pacific Northwest now, we moved here this summer. Warwick's will always have a special place in my heart. It's located in a beautiful part of San Diego above the Pacific Ocean. The people there are just lovely. And right now they have signed copies of this book. And it's super easy to order online. And supporting your local independent bookstore is always such a wonderful thing to do, not only for yourself, but also for your community and for the future generations. So buy local whenever you can.
Thank you for saying that. We'll put links below to Warwick's to buy them. We're going to put links to all the bookstores. And then also people who watch the show every week, Warwick's will be on in 2 weeks. So Another reason to tune in. Okay, Kristina, your local indie is in another part of the country. So what's the bookstore you're going to mention?
Yeah, and if it's okay, I'll actually mention two.
Please.
Because I would love that. Since one's sort of across the country that I got to go visit just recently, and that's Foxtail.
Yep.
So Foxtail Bookshop, I love them so very much. And they're just such a huge support of authors and events, and they hand sell the heck out of things because they're passionate about the stories that they sell, which I just love. So that's one of my absolute favorites. I have so many favorites, and all three of us could fill up a whole hour of this.
Of
but the other local one that I'll mention is Beach Books in Seaside, Oregon. And that's one of my locals since I'm Portland. And my kids have grown up going there and giving the owner Karen hugs. And she's watched them go from here to here. About right there. So I used to be tall for an Asian, is what was my claim to fame. I can no longer say that because both my boys tower over me by about 6 inches now. It's very sad and depressing.
They do grow up, despite our efforts to keep them small. They grow up. Ariel, what about you?
I would love, 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 love if people supported Parnassus. They are my local indie. I love them. They are a Nashville institution at this point, and very personal to me in that I have launched every single one of my novels there. So every time I've had a book come out, I've gotten to do it at Parnassus. I've invited my friends and my family and the people in my real life, and Susan and Kristina got to meet a bunch of them last week, the week before, when we launched the book at Parnassus. And it's always really special and really fun, those events for me, because people show up that knew me when I had braces. So I love that store. And as Susan said, Parnassus has signed copies. Really, any of these books have signed copies, and anyone who grabs a copy elsewhere, we would be happy to send you a book plate. We have them. So if you want to visit your local independent bookstore and grab a copy, you can email really any of us, and we'd be happy to pop a book plate in the mail so it can be signed.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for offering that. So again, we'll put links below to all of these bookstores, and the link to Parnassus, because we had Parnassus on the show way back in the beginning, and we'll put that link below. So you mentioned meeting Betty on your book tour, which obviously is a wonderful memory that you'll take with us. But you've all done a lot of book events over the years. If my math is correct, the three of you combined have published over 20 books.
Mm-hmm. Well, half of them are Susan's.
Actually, how many, Sue?
21.
Oh, you had 20. So I was wrong in the beginning when I said 15.
Okay.
And you were way too kind. Okay, so
you could add mine and Kristina's, double that number, and we still wouldn't match.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I apologize, Susan, for having it wrong in the beginning.
No worries.
Then you've published like dozens of books, the three of you together.
That's okay. You made her feel younger, so that was rewind time a little bit.
One of the things we love about independent bookstores are the events. You love the tour. It sounds like the three of you have had a great time, but we readers love the tours too. Like, I'm sure. I know so many fans, reader fans, who still talk about like, oh, the first time they met this author that they love. Like, that feeling is so amazing. I wonder, when you think about your book tours over the years, do you have an event that's like, oh, this event, this was the live event that made it all worthwhile, or the one I tell at dinner parties, or just something that made you realize, oh, wow, this is like, I'm so glad I'm a writer. Mm-hmm. Kristina?
Oh my gosh.
Want to say something? Do you have an example?
So many. And I think that I'm sure that the three of us agree on this. There's this big range. There's the events that you speak to 500 people at once, and they laugh at all the jokes, and you just feel like they're so just interested in the stories that you're telling. And it's such a good feeling. And then I've also done events that you show up at a small book club, and there's 6 people, and I walked away thinking, oh my gosh, that was the best night. And you feel like you just left a family that you just made. And so I think there's this huge range, but I will say that some of my most memorable, similar to Betty, have been meeting her, where a couple events I've done that somehow a person in the audience had a direct connection that blew me away. So I'll mention one is that Sold on a Monday, being inspired by a photo that has gone viral over the years of children being offered for sale. And it was on their own stoop in Chicago. Well, at one of the events, it was actually Foxtail a couple of years ago, and a gal who was there was the niece of a boy that was in the photograph that had passed away, that had been sold by his mother. So she was very excited to come and to meet me and to buy the book, and assigned it to her. So I mean, those are one of those things that you don't realize that you're walking into the personal connections that people have.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Ariel, how about you?
Yes. Oh gosh. So many. With every novel, there's been some connection to the story that has cropped up, usually via email, but in two events. With my novel, Flight of Dreams, it's based on the last ill-fated flight of the Hindenburg. And I was in Fairhope, Alabama, and there was an older gentleman that came to my signing. And as we were talking, he told me that when he was 13 years old, right before the Hindenburg went on its final flight, his father took him to tour the airship. And so he got to walk through the hallways of this ship that I wrote about. It was basically a floating luxury hotel, and I had to recreate it from memory. And this very sweet elderly man had come into the bookstore the week before, and he'd purchased the book, and he'd read it by the time I got there for my signing. And it was so wonderful and so gratifying, because he said, it's exactly the way that you described it. At the end of it, I just handed him the microphone, and he got to give us all a tour of the Hindenburg from his memory.
Wow.
That was fun. And then for my novel, I was Anastasia. This was actually at the Nashville signing. There's a character in that novel named Gleb Botkin, and he was the childhood friend of Anastasia Romanov, and his niece was at the signing.
Wow.
All things.
Wow.
You could have knocked me over with a feather. But it seems like something happens that way with every book. And it's the really fun, gratifying part for me of this job, because I can never read the book again. I never read them. There's no surprises left. I know how the rabbit was smuggled into the hat. I know who done it. So my relationship with the book is always different than it will be for a reader. But I always get these moments where the thing I have written about becomes really real to me in a way that it wasn't even when I was writing the story.
That's really magical. Wow.
Now we have Betty.
Yeah.
Betty. Susan, what about you?
Yeah, for me, I guess the most memorable one was I wrote a book called A Bridge Across the Ocean a few years back, and it's about war brides who married American GIs during the days leading up to D-Day. And after the war, getting all of those women home to the United States and Canada was a huge undertaking. And the Queen Mary, which is docked in Southern California now, was one of the transport ships that brought these GI brides from Europe to America. And the story features three of them. Well, I found one that was my go-to person during the research aspect of it. She lives in Indiana. Her name is June Allen. And we were able to bring June Allen out to Southern California to the Queen Mary. And we had a book tour called, it's put on by Adventures by the Book. And we took 2 tour buses from San Diego, drove up to Long Beach, California, 2 hours away, and had this tour on the Queen Mary, which June was a passenger on in 1946 when she was 20 years old. And it was magical. The ship itself is rather magical. It's also famed to be haunted, but in a really nice literary way, if you will. And we just had the best time. She was able to talk about the ship. Like we've talked about before, when you meet somebody who's got personal tie to the event, it not only brings it alive for you, the author, but it brings it alive for everybody in the room. It was one of the most magical days, I think, I'm having that day on the Queen Mary with June and on about 75 people that came up to tour the ship and hear her speak that day.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing those stories. Just want to remind everyone, we're putting links below to pick up your copy of When We Had Wings. And in addition to this collaboration, you all have projects that either have just come out or are coming out. Can you mention what's we can expect, what we should go buy? Christmas, Hanukkah, New Year's, like we have gifts to buy for people. So this
non-birthdays.
Yeah. And pre-orders are big. So even if the book isn't coming out until 2023, we want to pre-order the books now. So Ariel, can you tell us what's your latest project that people should go check out?
Yes. So if they want something today, which I hope you do, my last novel is called Codename Helene. And it is the story of an Australian expat named Nancy Wake, who was in France in the days leading up to World War II. And no sooner had she met and fallen in love with a French industrialist than the Germans invaded. And very quickly, Nancy was faced with the decision that so many people of the time were, which was do nothing, stand aside and do nothing, or try to help. And Nancy was not the kind of woman to sit aside and do nothing. So she began smuggling. At first, it was documents to get down to airmen and Jews out of France. And then it became smuggling the people themselves into Spain and over the Pyrenees Mountains. And she became so good at this work that the Nazis dubbed her the White Mouse. And she became the most wanted person by the Gestapo in any theater throughout the war. And she ended up with a 5 million franc price on her head. Her choice then was to get captured and eventually killed or escape herself. So she did. She took the same escape route that she'd helped many thousands others take into Spain, over the mountains, but she didn't stop there. She took a boat to England and marched herself directly to the Special Operations Executive. She became a spy for the British and was flown back into France behind enemy lines and ended up leading over 7,000 French resistance soldiers into battle against the Germans. It is a novel, but it is based on a true story.
Wow.
All of it happened. None of it's a spoiler. That is just a cover copy.
Wow. I'm excited if I get to go to Target on the weekends. Wow. These women in this book, they're so inspiring. This is fantastic. We'll put a link to Codename Helene below. Wow. Perfect gift for the holidays. Okay, Kristina, what's coming on the pike for you? You have a new book coming out.
Yeah, speaking of Target, I finally get to announce it. I haven't shared it with anybody yet, like publicly. So, but as of yesterday, I think it became official that my latest book called The Ways We Hide, which just came out. I don't know when it came out. It's been a blur. September 6th. So just a little bit ago, it was named the top 5 books of the year by Target. So
Yay!
So now I got to get down to Target and take a picture of the end caps, while they last, because we never know how long they'll last.
And so, I didn't know that. Just for our audience, I didn't know about that. So that Target reference was just like in the universe.
Know.
That's amazing. Congratulations.
It's like I paid you. Slip it in there with a great segue. I'm like, should I share it? Yeah, I'll share it.
Absolutely.
So I haven't posted about it or anything yet. So there you go. You got exclusive content.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So in short, the story is, and you can see, like, I'll tip my camera up here. See, it's right there. There's The Ways We Hide right behind me. And I do love that cover so much. And the title makes so much sense to readers once they finish the whole book. But in short, it is about a female illusionist in 1942 who is the mastermind behind an escape show. And the reason she's so good at escape traces back to a childhood trauma she survived back in Michigan's copper country called the Italian Hall disaster. And as a result of that, she became obsessed with escape, always needing 2 ways out of every room, and Houdini became her idol. And so because of her work and her skill set, she gets recruited by a British military intelligence group called MI9. Now, we all know MI5 and 6, but MI9 is what I call the go-go gadget team of World War II. They created escape and evade devices that they smuggled into almost anything you can think of, including Monopoly boards, which is where I got the idea for the story. And they would send those in care packages to help Allied POWs escape, and also help downed airmen in occupied territory escape Nazi capture, at which point they would go with the White Mouse and go over the mountains. So that's the gist of the story. And my character gets pulled much deeper in the war than she ever expects. And it is like a coming of age story, a love story. It's got thriller elements and suspense and of course wartime. So it's all the things that I love in books and movies. And so that's The Ways We Hide.
Oh my gosh, a link below. People have to go get that one too. This is fascinating. Okay, Susan, all these great books for us to read after we read When We Had Wings. Okay.
Yes, definitely. So if you're looking for something for Christmas, the book that is off to my, I guess, over my right shoulder, The Nature of Fragile Things, it's got the blue cover. It is a story set during, kind of before, during, and after the great 1906 San Francisco earthquake. It's been a book that people have been calling historical suspense, because I've got a fairly delicious mystery thread running through it. It's about a woman who is a mail order bride. She leaves New York, comes across the United States to marry a man she does not know in San Francisco, and soon finds out that there's something up with this man. He's not abusive. He's a good provider. He's extremely handsome. He has a little girl, and my character knows that she can't have children. So here she's finally being able to mother somebody when she thought she'd never be able to do that. But there's something up with him. And right about the time that she figures out what it is, the whole world begins to shatter all around her. And I mean, literally, the world begins to crumble. So that's The Nature of Fragile Things. If you're looking for something for Mother's Day or something a little bit later in 2023, the book that's coming out in 2023 is called Only the Beautiful. And the cover of it is over my left shoulder. And it's available for pre-order. And it's about two women who are impacted by the eugenics movement of the early 20th century. We don't hear much about the eugenics movement anymore. It was not a very good idea. It was very unfair. And it impacted people in the most horrendous ways. Eugenics was this idea that if we just improve the gene pool, if we had healthier, happier children, we'd have a better society. It was actually called race betterment. And so in many states, including California, they sterilized people without their knowledge for decades because there was this idea that only perfect people should be born. Therefore, imperfect people should not have children. And of course, that means there's somebody deciding who's perfect and who is not. Mm-hmm. You can imagine how terribly unfair that is. And that's just eugenics at its basics. At its worst, it's what we saw in Nazi Germany and all of their campaigns. And so the book is about a woman here in the States, in California, a young woman, and also an expat who is a nanny in Nazi-occupied Vienna. And she sees eugenics at its absolute worst. It's a hopeful story, though. I don't want you to think that just because it's about something terrible that it's not a hopeful story. I always leave readers with hope. So that book comes out in April 2023.
Wow. Thank you for giving us these additional books to put on our to-be-read lists. I'm struck by the fact that the three of you have written historical fiction from all different time periods, different subjects. And I'm curious if there's one story or time period that's on your dream list. Like, oh, I've never written about X and I've been like hoping, I've been like holding it in my back pocket. Do you have something like that, Ariel? Is there something you're like, oh, I really want to write about like 1980s New Jersey? I don't know, like that.
Yes. So I keep a running list of stories that I want to do. I've always wanted to write about pirates. I'm obsessed with pirates.
Love.
Although I've also always wanted to write about sort of the hippie movement when it was created at Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco. My father was there. My dad went there looking for the beatniks because the hippies didn't exist yet. He used to tell us that if you remember the 60s, you did not experience them. So thankfully, by the time we were all born, I think the experimentation was over. But he told us, me and my siblings, some of the craziest stories I've ever heard. And I've always thought it'd be really, really fun to put them in a novel and explore that very strange and wonderful cultural moment as it was happening.
Excellent. KRISTINA?
Well, I have two ideas I sat on for several years and decided to write The Ways We Hide when I came across the Monopoly and the gadgets. And by the way, I have to mention, because these two both have seen my fun gadgets. If any of the watchers here, the viewers, want to see some of the actual MI9 gadgets from World War II, I do own several of them, and they're on my website with videos, and I show how they did it, working with magicians and whatnot. So I did have that one take precedent because I got so excited about it, but I do have a couple other ones that are in my file folder that I've been dying to write for a while. And one of them is going to be on my next contract. So there has some Oregon history, early 1900s, and I can't share more yet, but oh my goodness, I can't wait. So that's one. And I think all three of us will agree that we all want to write about some place that we want to travel to, and then
research,
like business expense, like Paris. Paris sounds good. Maybe.
We have heard that from authors on the show that like advice, choose a destination in your novel that you want to visit. Yes, we have heard that.
It's not a pandemic, because that was part of the problem.
Yeah.
Netherlands, for the ways we hide, as this gorgeous area with canals and called Utrecht, and it's beautiful. It's like an unknown Amsterdam, and could not travel there. So I need to remedy that soon.
Excellent. Susan, what about you? Do you have a dream topic, genre, time period?
I always keep those really close to the chest, but I can tell you that the book that I'm researching now to be that I should have started writing it by now, and I haven't written one word yet, but I'm still researching. So it feels like it's still out in dreamland, if you will. And that is the years right after World War II, which we know now, we call them the Cold War years, because after World War II, you would have thought that the world would have been at peace after all that we had suffered across the globe. And now the hostilities are over and the enemy has been vanquished, and now we can rebuild and repair. But yet the world was not at peace. You know, the threat of Soviet takeover was like the new fear, and it was a valid fear, but it was also almost it almost took people to places that I didn't think they would go after what we'd experienced in World War II, and that's the Red Scare, and people looking askance at their neighbor. And so I'm going to be looking at the Cold War years and how we adapted after World War II, what that did to us as we grew out of the World War II era into this other world where there was a Cold War, where there were no battles being fought, if you will. It was a war that was not fought on a battlefield. A lot of it was in our psyche, in our fears, in our conversations around the dinner table. And I remember growing up in San Diego, we had bomb scares. So we had a civil defense siren. It was probably put up for tsunamis. But we practiced with it with bomb scares when I was in kindergarten, and this is the late 1960s, and so I feel like it's an era that deserves to have some stories written about it. 'Cause I think there's so many World War II stories out there now that people are going to be wondering, well, what happened after that? So that's going to be my stab at it.
Oh, really? Talking to the three of you is so much fun. I love peering behind the curtain and seeing how you put this wonderful book together and the other ideas that you've been working on, your other novels and the novels that are coming for us to read. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
This has been fun. Thank you.
Oh, sure. And to our audience, please go check out When We Had Wings. This is a great read, so inspiring, perfect to put in your suitcase if you're going traveling this holiday season. We know that airport travel is terrible and you might be stuck at the airport. If you read this book, it will not be a terrible experience. And then the holidays are coming, and this will just be a wonderful gift for the reader in your life. Thank you again for being with us today. To the three of you and to our audience, if you liked today's show, and we certainly hope that you did, please subscribe to A Mighty Blaze on Facebook to get notified about all of our other events. If you're not a Facebook person, hop over to our website, amightyblaze.com, to sign up for our weekly newsletter. And join us back here next week for another episode of Authors Love Bookstores. Until then, be well and keep reading this book. And thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.